Dear students, in statistics, we always make a distinction between two concepts, namely population and sample. Population and sample. Population consists of the set of all measurements in which the investigator is interested. The set of all measurements in which the investigator is interested. For example, farmers of India. Population is all the agricultural households. Population is also known as universe. That is the entire collection of objects, population or universe. A sample is a subset of the measurements of the population, or a sample is simply a subset of the population. And before considering this in detail, remember this. If the information about the population is not available, you can collect the information by taking what is known as a census. For example, in India, a census is conducted once in every year, every 10 years, to collect information about population. Population means human beings and also animals, livestock, etc. This exercise is conducted in most of the countries of the world. But a census, as it is familiar to you, is time-consuming, costly, and require a lot of effort, man hours, money, etc. In India, for example, census is taken once in every 10 years with the help of teachers and various government agencies, etc., etc. So in many cases it is, and also in many cases, a census is not practical. Even though we can conduct a census in some cases, it is not possible in all the cases. For example, if you want to study the burning hours of a bulb, you cannot burn all the bulb to determine the average burning hours. That is impractical. So, what we do is, other than census, we use two methods to collect information about the population. One is sampling. The other one is experimentation. We first make a difference between population and sample, and our aim is to collect information about population. One method is census, not very practical. So two other methods are to collect information about population are sampling and experimentation. Remember this. Observational data is generally collected using a sampling procedure. Whereas, that is what I say is, observational data is generally collected using sampling procedures. Whereas, the second type of data which we have discussed, that is a designed experiment, also generates data. It is experimental data, not observational data. So, sampling is generally used, and in social sciences, data about the population is generally collected by means of sampling. Whereas in natural sciences, physical sciences, etc., medical sciences, etc., data is generated by experimentation, by designing an experiment. Now, if sampling is the appropriate method for collecting data, as in social sciences, as I told you, we must decide how to select a sample. That is, how to collect, how to fix the samples so that we will obtain an appropriate data, a representative data from the population. And since sample values are used to make inferences about the population, it is absolutely necessary that the sample is representative. So, we can generate data either by means of sampling or by means of experimentation. If sampling is the appropriate method to collect information about the population or the universe, we must decide how to collect sample. If sample selection is not correct, then you will get inferences which will be faulty. And as an example, in the 1936 presidential election in USA, before election, a magazine known as Literary Digest conducted an opinion poll, and the magazine asked whether the voters will vote for Republicans or Democrats. And it predicted an easy win for London. But what happened is, when the results were declared, it was a landslide victory for Roosevelt. Now, what happened here? The survey was conducted by a Literary Digest, asked the people whether they will vote for Republicans or Democrats. Prediction was London will win. This is 1936 election, not 48, which we have considered earlier. But what happened is Roosevelt. The reason was the sampling procedure was totally inappropriate. And sample was collected by the magazine through what is known as a telephone. And in 1936, only the well-to-do had telephones, and well-to-do historically voted for Republicans. So those with the telephones, though they represent Republicans, were not representing the US population. That is one reason. The second one is the response rate was very low, only 25%. And most of the responses were made by the Republicans, Landon supporters. So there was a sample selection bias. There was also a non-response bias. Due to these two reasons, the outcome was entirely different from what is predicted. Sample was not representative. It suffered from sample selection bias, also suffered from non-response bias. So due to these two reasons, the procedure went wrong. Instead of Landon, Roosevelt won the election. So if sampling is the method of data collection employed, it is absolutely necessary that the sample is representative. Then only you can make predictions about population quantities, which we will discuss in detail, based on sample information or sample statistics. And most modern sampling procedures involve the use of what is known as probability sampling. Probability sampling. Most modern sampling procedures involve what is known as probability sampling. Now, in probability sampling, a random device such as tossing a coin, consulting a table of random numbers, or a random number generator is used to select the samples. And with the availability of many statistical softwares, there is an inbuilt procedure for generating random numbers. The procedure will be discussed using softwares. Now, so we use the random number generator available with the softwares to determine or to select a number of samples randomly. For example, if your population consists of 1 to 1000 members, and if you have to take 100 samples from a total of 1000 observations, the 100 samples will be generated by a random number generator or a table in the past. Nowadays we use softwares. Even though we use probability sampling, it is still yield a non-representative sample. But it is possible that it will not be representative even if we use a random number generator. But it enables us to eliminate selection bias. Selection bias. There will be no selection bias here because selection of samples is not based on the whims and fancies of the sample collector. Also, the use of probability sampling techniques enables us to apply the rules and procedures of inferential statistics. Inferential statistics. So, as our focus is inferential statistics, we collect samples not for its own sake, but for making inferences about population parameters. So, the probability sampling techniques enables us to use sample information to make inferences about population characteristics. Now, as probability sampling is the most acceptable method of sample collection, let us consider what are the most important probability sampling methods. What are the most important probability sampling methods? In the next session, we will consider the most important probability sampling methods. So remember this, we have a population. Information about the population can be collected by means of a census. But what we generally do is we use a sample to collect information about population. Or we use experimentation to generate data. In social sciences, sampling is generally used. In experimental, in biological, physical, etc. sciences, we use experimentation, as in the case of folic acid study. So, in the observational studies, sampling procedure is the most widely used. If the data is generated by experimental methods, not observational data, but experimental data, it is generated under controlled conditions. Now, since sampling is the most widely used method in social sciences, and we have to consider various types of probability sampling methods. Probability sampling methods, which is the most common sampling procedure. And there are various probability sampling methods, and we will discuss this, the most important of these in the next session.